What is the difference in attitude and the difference in mentality from polishing the edges to building a company?
Well, I think it's going from high risk to low risk activity behaviors. You don't want to push code because the customer needs it. You want to push code because the release process is over. Like just mature operating from woohoo, oh my God, it worked, to like, oh, okay, now you're like in a factory cranking them out.
What would you advise people to focus on?
The thing that I focused on for the first million in revenue was getting to the first million in revenue. Some of the best advice I got was like, and everything changes. And if you don't change, then you get stuck or you stay in founder 1.0.
Ben Lilienthal is the co-founder and CEO of ScreenMeet, a pioneering platform that transforms the way enterprises deliver real-time remote support and collaboration. With a strong focus on modernizing legacy IT service management tools, Ben has led ScreenMeet to a significant growth, securing major contracts with global tech giants and attracting strategic investments from notable investors, including ServiceNow and Salesforce. Under his leadership, the company has raised millions in funding and expanded its reach across 65 countries. Beyond his work at ScreenMeet, Ben is a fellow of the prestigious Aspen Global Leadership Network's Henry Crown Fellowship Program, where he champions centrist political candidates and actively contributes to social initiatives. With a passion for innovation, leadership, and community building, Ben continues to drive the evolution of enterprise support solutions while balancing his commitment to his growing family. Ben, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Arthur. Thanks.
I'm really excited to talk with you about your journey as an entrepreneur. You've started multiple companies, you've gone through multiple exits. ScreenMeet is your latest venture. It's gained a lot of traction, a lot of support, no pun intended. And it's also very interesting because you have worked from the beginning with strategic, both investors and strategic go-to-market partners. You've really engineered the product and the company, but you've also engineered the go-to-market. Before we get into all those topics, could you tell us a little bit about ScreenMeet, why you started ScreenMeet, and how it's helping your customers?
ScreenMeet is pretty straightforward. We took an existing product, remote support, and we reimagined it in the cloud. And remote support is used by IT help desk to help employees fix issues with their devices, and it's used with contact center. So if I'm calling company X, I have a piece of hardware or software I need them to fix, they can use remote support. And so we took that and we reimagined it for the modern cloud sort of architecture and ecosystem. And because of that, it's more secure, it's easier, it's faster, it's just better. And when people see it, they like it and they buy it and they use it, and it's probably not going away. And so that's what ScreenMeet is. It makes it easier to fix computers, whether internally or externally.
And one of the interesting things about this is that the market before you guys really was mostly on premise. So you had to deploy this inside the firewall on a server inside of your IT infrastructure.
Well, it was in the cloud, but it wasn't really SaaS, right? So it was a separate application that you bought, and then you had to sort of use one platform to do one thing, and then you used remote support. Sort of, you would chair swivel is the term.
Interesting.
And then with ScreenMeet and our cloud architecture, it makes it simple to embed into any other sort of system of record.
And can you maybe give us an example of, like, if you're working in an IT help desk, why would you want to gain access to the quote unquote customer's computer or the person that you're supporting's computer?
Right. So again, if you're in an IT help desk, you're helping an employee.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in a contact center, you're helping a customer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same problem you're solving. Something's wrong on the machine, on the actual computer or the piece of software, and you need to fix it to get them back to work or to get the customer sort of off the phone.
And what operating systems is this running on?
Yeah. So the issues that get fixed with that are things that can't be deflected through knowledge bases or chat bots or now AI, right? So there's still some percentage of every, kind of knowledge base needs to escalate to real-time support. And so whether that's on a PC, Mac, Android, or iOS, and even some flavors of Linux.
Interesting. And what's like the most common use case? Is there a common use case? Like if I'm an employee or if I'm a customer, I write a support ticket, the person on the other end can gain access. Like for what and why?
Again, depending on on the department,
Hmm.
the use case changes. So for SecOps, it's to validate installs. For the IT help desk, it really depends on the company. But I'm sure a lot of it is I need to reset an application or I lost my password. And then finally, for the consumer, again, it depends on the vertical that we're servicing, whether it's hardware, software, retail, e-commerce, things like that.
And you guys have seen a lot of really great growth, especially during COVID. I think like maybe a lot of work from home related stuff. Obviously, on the support side, there's no physical interaction when you're calling a support line as a consumer or as a customer. What do you attribute the growth that your company has seen in this last 3, 4, 5 years? Why has it been so successful?
Yeah, well, there have been no new entrants in the category. And
Okay.
so because we are the disruptor,
Mhm.
our value prop is so strong that the early adopters, the pragmatists once you, it takes a long time to change behavior.
When you,
So,
no, please.
so the folks that have adopted the new architecture paradigm, like it's just the rest of the industry has to catch up.
Like as a new entrant in the market, as somebody who is disrupting the market, how are you thinking about customer acquisition and like what kind of customers are you looking for when they
Yeah.
maybe have an old way of doing things?
Yeah. Well, I think it changes depending on what stage of the company you're at, you
Okay.
know? And so for this initial kind of establishing the beachhead,
Mhm.
we mainly relied on channel referrals, strategic go-to-market partnerships, as well as, sort of doing our own outbound.
Well, what's really interesting about your product specifically is that it integrates with a number of different tools. And because of that, it seems like you've engineered your go to market to leverage those integrations. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, you would say we did that on purpose. But I mean, it definitely lent itself to it because it's an add-on to somebody else's thing,
Hmm.
so we can but
I mean, was it not
but
on
yeah,
purpose? Were it was like,
I mean, you always want to find something that you can hide under. You want to right, you want to be like the fish that swims next to the shark.
okay, explain that. Explain that. Because for those who like don't or haven't
Yeah,
gone through this specifically, like
yeah,
how do you drift or like get some of that draft rather?
right. Get some of that. Well, you find a big brother and pick up. It's like, what is it? Grabbing nickels in front of bulldozers. You know,
I have
like,
not heard that expression. I
oh
didn't.
yeah, yeah. That's like a Wall Street trading term or something. Yeah,
But
yeah. I
basically,
mean,
what? Go ahead.
you're finding big ecosystems and you're picking off. You know, you're sort of grabbing deals if they come your way.
Like on paper, it makes so much sense, Ben, because like you got Salesforce, you got which has obviously the big help desk and customer support element to it, both on the employee customer, but obviously on the customer. And then you have ServiceNow, which focuses on the IT use case quite dramatically. So you've got both of these big bulldozers, as an example. And I know that you have multiple other ones. If you feel like sharing them, do. But what I'm curious about is if I wanted to start a business that is in an ecosystem, in a network like this, would I do this from the beginning in this sort of way? Strategically pick out these big whales?
Massive. Well, yeah. I mean, you also have to remember there's what is it? Luck is where hard work meets preparedness or something.
I'm very familiar with this.
Yeah, right. So like when our first big customer was like, "Oh, it works in Salesforce. Can you make it work in ServiceNow?" And my response was, "What's ServiceNow?" You know. So like, so like in hindsight, yeah, it looks brilliant, but I, we sort of are literally like when I was explaining to Eugene like why we should do this, I was like, I know we should put it in the cloud and it'll be good, but I'm not sure exactly why, you know.
So
And
what?
then
Uh,
so like you just know that the next architecture is better. It has to be, right? That's why like, it goes from desktop to server but then it goes from server to cloud,
so
right?
was you starting this company really like a view on the mechanism of delivery is changing? I'm basically taking an existing category and I'm upgrading it to the newest technology. I'm taking it from
That
on-prem to cloud to
that
SaaS.
that is that is literally the byline of my career. That's all I've done. That's all I know how to do.
I mean, that's also what Workday did from PeopleSoft to
Oh,
Workday.
dude,
So it's not like a
I
bad
mean,
call.
I wish I had been Skype and not the conference calling, right? I wish, right? Always the bridesmaid, never the
Well, that
bride,
was your
right? But
previous
like,
company, for those that don't
but
know.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. And before that, it was email to webmail,
Uh-huh.
right? Conference calling to VoIP, and now remote support to cloud remote support.
Interesting.
Like, I don't know. I mean, it works for me. It doesn't work for everybody,
But
but
it's a great play because it allows you to capitalize on massive trends. And in some ways, there's like a Harvard Business Review study on this, right? Like if you ask me, like it makes sense. Why reinvent the wheel? Is Salesforce any different? It's not like CRM didn't exist in Siebel before.
well, but I mean, but the difference is those guys like had like like cojones, dude. Like big bets, right? Like you live in Miami. Come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, there's
but
definitely big
but
bets
like
to be had. But this is a
but
big bet too.
no, this is more like a capital efficient bet.
Okay, what does that mean?
Because
Explain that.
because like when I was doing my first company, like nobody was giving me free money. You know,
Are
they're
they
like, you don't have any money, so go figure out how to fucking get distribution.
uh, I
Right?
know the times have changed a little bit, right? Like I even 15 years ago, like the investment rounds were a lot smaller. I think there was a lot less all these alternative investments in the market, meaning private equity, venture capital.
Oh yeah, there was much less liquidity.
Yeah, there's much less
Much-
liquidity. That's right. So can you like shine some light on your experience now, beginning your career? You got to come with 1 million in revenue if you want somebody to give you $100,000. I'm being a little bit
What?
tongue in cheek.
No, no. Like to give you $1 million, you had to have 1 million in revenue, right?
That's
And there
how it
was no
felt.
recurring revenue. So you would sell like a license and a subscription and a support thing,
Maintenance, yeah.
but it was just like 20 per, like you always had to sell new shit
So,
every quarter.
so tell
It
me about
sucked.
now. Like if you're a new cat and you're like ready to start a company, maybe it's your first, maybe it's your second, whatever. Like how much better does the new generation have it been?
Well, I would argue, I don't think so. I think
Oh,
there's so much more competition, you know,
interesting.
because like everybody's has a startup. Like before, people were like, what do you, you know?
Uh-huh.
And now it's like, it's too mainstream to be like, that's why you have such uh, big rounds and like big funds. And they're like, we're not playing around anymore. But
So
before it used to be like, I mean, it would just be the most random collection of weirdos, you know, because it was so on the fringe.
yeah, it was kind of underground, and now it's like super
Yeah.
mainstream and popular. Like
See,
everyone's
now
a
it's in,
founder.
yeah. Yeah. Everyone's a founder, dude. Everyone has a fucking podcast, right?
That's fact. That's fact.
Dude, what's your TikTok?
You can find us at Founders in Focus.
Nice. Nice.
The podcast does surprisingly well on TikTok, even though we're like what 5, 6 episodes in. TikTok is a great platform for um, content
Distribution.
creators. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
it's
bet.
really great. Okay, well, now that we've gotten all that out of the way, if you're a founder in today's day and age, all right, like maybe it is a little mainstream, all right, maybe it is a little cool, and maybe being a founder CEO today is something that like can be a real job. I remember telling my parents that I'm going to start a company, and they were so upset. Like maybe today they would be a little bit more open minded to it if they were on TikTok or listening to this podcast or whatever.
Yeah, right.
What advice do you have for someone like today? Right, it makes no sense to give advice for people who started a company 20 years ago, but like today, like you're starting a company, you want to be a founder, you are a founder. Maybe you're like starting a family, maybe you already have a family, maybe you're straight out of school. But either way, you're like, I have a dream, I want to do it. I don't care that it's mainstream. Maybe that's even a good thing. Like, what advice do you have for that?
I think being a founder is a personality thing
Ooh,
primarily. I think people select for that because they share similar certain personality traits, and I don't think it's for everyone.
explain what
That's
those
just
personality traits are. Break it down for us.
ambition, stubbornness. I don't know what you would say.
Yeah.
Um, some amount of self aggrandizement or self delusion. You
A
know,
Machiavellian, like.
whatever. But some healthy ego,
Yeah.
clearly,
Mhm.
right? Um, and commitment. I think people underestimate the level of commitment required because you can't stop, won't stop.
And there's so many reasons to stop.
Oh, there's 99 reasons, right? All the time, right? Um, but that's like the hardest because like even, even the most toughened folks don't realize like can't handle it.
So what about like that growth from like, okay, because there's a grit phase where it's like nothing's working and we got to figure it out. Not everybody has this, but I would say the majority of companies go through at least
Yeah, but
some of
that's
that.
like the beginning. That's like the beginning,
That's
right?
like the beginning, right? And then you get to
Right.
the point.
You gotta like sand off the edges, right?
Okay,
You're like, hey, I think I got something. People are like, well, you gotta like clean it up a little bit,
it's a great analogy. You got to de-risk it, whatever you want to call it.
whatever.
But then eventually it gets to like the scale phase, and maybe it's the 0 to $10 million phase, or the 1 to 10, the 1 to 15, the 1 to 20, which I know you've been through multiple times. What is the difference in attitude and the difference in mentality from polishing the edges to building a company?
I can tell you what I think it is.
Yeah, that's why we're having you on the show, Ben. We want to
Um,
hear what you think.
well, I think it's going from high risk to low risk
Mm.
activity behaviors. You know, like you don't want to push code because the customer needs it. You want to push code because the release process is over, right? Right.
I
You
mean,
don't want to think like just mature operating from woohoo, oh my god, it worked, to like, oh, okay, now it's like now you're like in a factory cranking them out.
those are like very different jobs, though, right? Like one is you got to
They're
just like,
and potentially different people, right? It's all the psychology, right? It's a different mindset. Uh, it's a different discipline.
so how do you become
And
that? How do you become that founder 2.0? How do you become that CEO 2.0, founder 2.0?
I mean, I'm learning it on the job, right? You know,
Everyone is.
uh, you know, strong convictions weakly held, right?
Hmm.
You know, like
Yeah. I mean, there's no
what
other way.
part, what, what part needs my attention right now?
Hmm.
Because ideally, none of it does, but that's never the case in the real world, right? You know,
How do you split your time? I mean, now that you're, again, this is obviously your third or even fourth company. You've done this quite a few times, but now that you're in this scaling phase, the company's bigger, you've got a lot of customers, you got a lot of employees, you guys are fast growing. How do you spend your time? Like, what do you focus on, and and maybe
well,
even to frame it for the listener, like, what would you advise people to focus on?
I mean, the thing that I focused on for the first million in revenue was getting to the first million in revenue.
Yeah. I mean, that's no
You
joke.
know what I mean? Like
Totally.
nothing else mattered, right? you're just like whatever it, and then you focus on different things. I mean, right now we're just focusing on hardening the infrastructure.
Because you guys are scaling and you have a lot more users and a lot more
Well,
companies.
you have a lot more at risk when things break,
Totally.
right? Your risk profile changes.
Yes.
And so now you have to just de-risk that. Up until now it was kind of like, well, it's been working, you know. So, so to your point, that founder 2.0 phase, I mean, the some of the best advice I got was like, and everything changes. And if you don't change, then you get stuck or you stay in founder 1.0
Mm-hmm.
and you don't get to play the next level. You don't go through, right? And like, why not keep playing? And from a financial perspective, some of like the smartest like Wall Street people are like, why would you ever sell compounding cash flows? And I'm like, that's why you're a billionaire. you know, like I'm just so it's like very interesting, right? Like, like there are rewards to each, as you go through the maze kind of thing.
And then what is founder 3.0? So like 1.0 is, 0 to 1,
Well, yeah, I think you would have traditionally said IPO.
but that's not even
But
like really.
no, that's like the Wu-Tang flag just falling down.
That's representative of the IPO window currently. Yeah.
That's founder 3.0. Just stay in founder 2.0. I don't know, right? You build a rocket and send Katy Perry into space.
Okay, that's when you get to the Bezos level.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
but
right.
that transition, I mean, I feel like that's really important. Like I think it's not highlighted quite enough because if you're starting a company and you're going through the early days and you're still in the product market fit or call it the company market fit, customer market fit, whatever you want to call it, you're in that understanding of what does the product do. You're in that understanding, but then there's like an extension existential thing that happens as a founder. And this has happened to me multiple times where I have to grow. And the things that worked 30 days ago no longer work. I am no longer pounding the phones, trying to get a customer to close, which I love doing in the early days. Uh, and then for the next 7 years, I have to build a team that does the job that I used to do. And
Yep.
it
Yeah.
completely changes your own psychology, who you are, your growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the other thing that I would say, like, what have I actually spent my time on in the
Yeah.
last recruiting,
Oh, yeah. Talk about that.
interviewing, hiring, identifying, like the other thing about founder 2.0, I think, is you have a broader, longer term perspective, right? So you can almost think a year ahead. Not all the time, but like you can almost envision it, right? Where founder 1.0, you're like, you can't think past tomorrow, you know, or
Hiring
past the
is
next deal.
hiring is going to make or break your company. What
Yeah,
are
and yeah, I think there's a real thing to A's hire A's and B's
Yes,
hire C's,
100%.
you know, and like, I mean, Eugene is a 10x guy,
Hmm.
right? So like,
Your co-founder, CTO.
yeah, so like, if you can get a bunch of 10x people or even 5x, so you really like like sometimes you just make the hire because it makes sense and it was easy and it works. But like when you're if you're like we just did a process for somebody and it was like, I mean, he's a 10x guy.
What do you do when you hire someone you think they're a 10x guy or gal? They join the company, and then you're like, "Oh, I made a mistake." Not that that's ever happened to
Well,
you, but
oh yeah, I mean all the time. I mean, hopefully you have a 90-day out.
yeah, and a
you know,
cliff for their equity.
yeah, but I mean generally we have a 90-day sort of trial period.
Okay, how do you structure that? Tell
Well,
us
you
about
don't
that.
get any well, you just don't grant options and
You
things
don't do
like
you
that.
don't do a year cliff that if it doesn't work in a
Well,
year.
and you do a year cliff, or or it's a 9-month cliff, but like you
Okay.
don't do the paperwork on Like it's just stuff like that to give you a little more flexibility if it's just a, if you just wake up on Monday and it just doesn't work.
Talk us through it.
New hires or getting rid of new hires?
Talk us through how to protect the company from making a hire that you think is good. You're not going to make a hire if you think it's bad. But like, what are some of the safety nets that if you're a first-time founder or even a founder who just wants to
Oh, you
refresh the
just
best
make.
practices, what are they?
Oh, you just get with your lawyer and get like a good employment agreement.
All right, fine.
Yeah.
You're going to
I
hold
don't know,
out on
dude.
us.
Dude, I don't know.
How do you pick a good lawyer? I was really lucky. I've worked with a really great corporate lawyer, and I've also worked with some corporate lawyers that were not great at first, and then I had to switch, and then I found a great one. The last one I worked with was fantastic. I don't have his permission to say his name on the podcast, but maybe at some point we'll mention him. Um, Great firm. How do you pick a good lawyer, and why is that
I mean,
important?
you kind of get, well, no, to your point, the second lawyer I met has been my lawyer the whole time. I mean, generally, like a good firm like Cooley,
Hmm.
like I work with Cooley, and a lot of the guys I had worked with at Wilson Sonsini at the last company now are partners at Cooley.
Hmm.
So that made me feel good, including like a guy I went to high school with.
Yeah, and I guess I can say the
So
firm's name. I worked with Fenwick and West, which I highly recommend.
yeah, right. Same thing. Same thing.
But you want to go with
Uh,
one of the big brand. I'm just
well,
going to
but you
say,
don't want to use them for like you just want to use them for like your securities. And then if you need like an IP issue or something, you escalate it. You want to find somebody else to do your contracts.
yes, your sales contracts.
Yeah, yeah, because you don't want to
It's too
spend a
expensive.
thousand bucks an hour. Or you spend whatever.
Do you guys have somebody in house that does your sales contracts? Do you have somebody like,
No, we have somebody who are like our COO Lou has worked with for decades.
and they do the
And he's
red lines on the sales contracts? They do the red
yeah, and
lines
he's
on.
like a former partner, and this is kind of what he does in his spare time.
Cool. What kind of stuff do you guys give to them besides sales contracts? Is there anything else, or is that just really to get that like velocity in the sales motion?
He's done like our privacy policies.
Okay. Yeah.
You know,
So like things on the fringes a little bit. It makes a ton of sense.
things that are on the transactional side.
Yeah, but when it comes to like employment agreements or
Yeah, but they'll give you like a template for those.
right, but like you might be negotiating
And
somebody's
then
exit or somebody's
yeah,
entrance,
right, right. And then separately, I have a patent lawyer.
which is not part of your Cooley team or your
No,
sales
no,
transaction team.
because they're like in DC and like I've done that's all they do is file patents and
What do you
defend.
think on the? I've heard other people say this that patents and software aren't worth a lot.
Well, I'm probably just 10 years behind the time. Like I'm like a old dog here. Like I need patents.
Are you doing it for the ego boost, Ben? Be honest.
I'm putting Eugene's name on them, dude, and
Ah,
like our engine. Like I'm not even on them.
um,
Yeah, yeah. I have the little lucite thing on my desk. Here, I'll show you.
what's interesting about your career is that you've kind of been a founder from the very beginning, right? Like you've been from the time you've really started your career up until now, you've been starting companies, building them, and selling them. And your game plan has always been build, sell, so build, exit, build, exit. It's built a great life for you. It's built a great life for your family. You've had a ton of success doing it. What does it feel like not to be employable?
It feels about the same as it's always felt. uh, do you know why I got fired from my first job out of college?
No, but I would love to hear the story.
Because it was a small consulting firm in my hometown, Reston, Virginia, and they had solved game theory.
What does that
And they
mean to
were
solve game theory?
it means like like the prisoner's dilemma,
I've heard of
right?
that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Like if we're both in jail, who should tell on who to get the best.
Hmm.
But what it means is uh, they could now do these simulations until there was like a Nash equilibrium, and then tell the people who were having the negotiation like who they should influence.
So they had
And
an algorithm that would be able to solve things like the prisoner's dilemma or other
and
game
and
theory?
and provide recommendations for how to modify the outcomes based on what the client wanted.
And this is before AI. This is like,
Dude, these guys should win the Nobel Prize. It was a guy at Pomona, a guy at the Hoover Institute, and
wow.
like their professor was at Michigan.
Whoa.
And I ran into one of them like 15 years later at the State Department.
This is your first job is with these
Yeah,
guys.
so first job, and we helped, we gave JP Morgan like a report on who to lobby to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act. You know, it
That's
was
pretty
like
cool, dude.
that's like one of my first meetings, like, like 25 Broad Street, and I'm like, here I am out of like an anthropology major from Amherst. I'm like, what am I doing? This is evil, But so I built but they did a lot of work for the CIA
Okay.
because the CIA takes in data, but it doesn't know what to do with it.
Okay.
So these guys would analyze. They were like, oh, the Yeltsin coup will fall and fail quickly,
Wow.
right? And they were right.
In the early 90s.
Yeah. Well, I worked there. I graduated in '95. So, yeah. So one of the things they had me do was build a website because they wanted a website.
Mhm.
So I went to Barnes and Noble and got HTML for Dummies and like sat there.
Great book.
And then my other job was I would send these data sets over email to the various professors who would run the models.
Okay.
So I had I had like an email account down there and shit.
Uh-huh.
And in the spring, it was a year job. They were like, well, we want you to stay for like 3 to 5 years and like be the junior partner, get security clearance. And I'm like, no fucking way, dude. Like, all I want to do is get out arrested. And then they were like, oh, we found these emails you sent to these guys in Hawaii, like looking for jobs. And so we're just going to fire you like in May, like on the spot.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Cause they're like fucking, they're just like super like vindictive. And so they fired me in May of '96. So that's how I became an entrepreneur.
So you had this job at this crazy, we call it a think tank kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it was called Decision Insights. They were
Okay.
they were basically an algorithm
Selling to government, primarily
selling.
banks.
And also to Accenture. What became Accenture used to be Arthur
Arthur
Andersen.
Anderson, yep.
They had a big
R.I.P.
sort of
Enron.
strategy thing as the board was dissolving Arthur Andersen into like Accenture and
Uh-huh.
Anderson Consulting.
Uh-huh.
So they were involved in that fucking struggle. They were selling strategy, probably to both sides.
Okay, so and then these guys.
So I get fired.
Uh-huh.
This guy says, "Well, you're lucky. Most people live lives of quiet desperation."
He said
He
that
had
to me.
previously been a publisher, and years later, my buddy was like, "Oh, that's a Mark Twain quote." He
Yes.
didn't, And so I'm like bawling, right? I think I'm living at home still, and so I go and hang out with one of my college buddies that weekend, and then Monday morning, I'm like, I'm starting a web design company. Like, if these guys need a website,
Everyone does.
the internet's going to be big. Right?
This is in the mid
So
90s.
this is in May of '96. Or no, I was living in DC. I needed to pay rent. I was like, I'll make a couple websites and then I'll just use that money and travel around the world.
But that was like that was a services company. That's not what ultimately was your first business, right?
Well, no, dude. How do you think we paid for the software?
So you
We built
consulted you
website.
bootstrapped your
We
way into the
built,
first business.
dude. I sat there and coded HTML for like my high school buddy's older brother was like a super talented graphic designer,
Hmm.
and I had to God, what's this sales book? There was this like sales book on like how to close, and until I read how to master the art of selling, and
Okay.
until I read that, I couldn't sell. I could just describe.
Ooh, powerful.
And then, dude, we kind of crushed it as a web design company, and then we found a guy who had been building the software that we had envisioned, and that's how Nascent got off the ground. It was totally bootstrapped.
How
And then
did
we
you
raised
go?
$500,000 from friends and family, like 25K at a time.
Wow.
There's a guy in DC, Cal Larson, who was like a super angel. John May, there's a whole sort of budding, emerging network there. Mario Marino had started a whole institute for entrepreneurship.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool.
How did you go from doing these services to building a product?
Well, that was always the idea. We just had to come up with a good product. And then we had to but like, dude, I like flew out to San Francisco to meet a guy who had built a similar product. Like I was shopping for a technical co-founder, right? And using the revenue to sort of fund it.
Did you find one?
Yeah, in our backyard. Yeah, the guy lived in like 20 minutes from me. And so that was, the three of us were nascent, me, Sam, and Adam. And but it wasn't until we had $500,000 in revenue that we could raise $500,000 in angel funding.
That's how it was back then. Nobody was gonna do a shot like that.
We never raised venture.
Really?
We sold it 3 years later.
That's
a publicly traded company.
That's amazing. And then
we were going to sell it to AOL. Dude, AOL almost bought it.
Really?
Well, they thought about buying, but then the guy at AOL went back to CMGI and then bought us.
And then CMGI bought you guys.
Yeah.
That's and that changed your life, right? Because then you went on vacation.
Dude. Yeah. I wouldn't say I went on vacation. I just had more freedom than I thought I was going to have.
Well, I'm kidding, because you went and started another company. You didn't go on vacation. I'm sure you took some time off, right?
Dude, I went on vacation. I definitely went on vacation.
Oh, you did?
I went to South America. I moved to New York City. Right.
Okay.
Got a job for a year. Right.
Okay, cool. And then you said, okay, well, now I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to keep starting and selling companies. Was it an obvious thing, or was it kind of like, oh, I have a great idea? Like, how did you go from your first company to your second company?
Again, in hindsight, it seems obvious, right? I went to business school.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I went to NYU. I was living a block away. 9/11 happened.
Right.
And it was the only place I got in.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And literally they were like, look, if we let you in, are you going to come? Or are you going to just go somewhere else?
Interesting. What did you say?
I'm like, I'm in, here's my check.
And you just walk over from your baller downtown apartment?
2 blocks away.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. But when I was in business school, I was like, oh, now I know what everybody else does. Like they still don't know they still don't know how to do what I do,
Mm-hmm.
And so I had been working for a guy actually he had this service that what he missed the most was being able to like talk shit with his friends during baseball games. And so he had this service that did that. And he had it built. And I was like, Adam, what you really need to do is make it into this. And he was like, why would I ever do that? And I'm like, okay, well, I might go do that.
Okay.
And he was cool enough to be like, cool, okay, right? Instead of totally because I was consulting for him, I was, And then a year later in the middle of business school, I'm like, well, shit, why don't I go do that? It's better than getting literally it was why would you want to work at, JP Morgan corporate finance this summer in Greenwich? Looking at your resume, it seems like you're more suited to doing your own thing. And I was like, some bullshit answer. And I walked out. I'm like, yeah, fuck that. I'm going to go build this conference calling thing. And that first year, to your point, it's so exciting,
Yeah.
You're you're making stuff happen.
Uh-huh.
But then But then that's not really the job, that's just the beginning of the job. But
And
that's why you do it again, because that like excite, it's like falling in love, it's like it's so cool to build something new,
and
it's cool.
this company eventually turned into WebEx, right?
No, go to meeting.
GoToMeeting. Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
go to
A
meeting.
WebEx competitor. And tell us about that journey, like year two.
Dude, dude, we ended up making so we were making conference calling servers.
Hmm.
The software, like we used at the time, you had something that was a telephony card. Like if you're going to run telephone signals,
Okay.
you had these special pieces of hardware,
Okay.
almost like a GPU, but for telephones. And they were from like specialty card manufacturers like Dialogic or Natural Microsystems. And
Okay.
they were DSPs, digital signal processors, right? Because you would take, phone signals in. And so we called up Natural Micros NMS, which got bought by Intel or something,
Mm.
3Com or something. And we were like, we want your telephony card, but we only want it with Ethernet ports, because we only want to send voice over IP onto it. And they were like, nobody's ever asked us for that before. And then we became one of their largest customers in like 2 years.
Wow.
So it's just one of these, like, it was just one of these, and I had no idea what a DSP was until like the day before I called them. You know what I mean? And so we built these servers, sold a bunch of them, but then it was the whole like, you didn't have and then they went out and made a shit ton of money. And then so finally we were trying to sell servers to Skype, and they said, why don't you just run the service for us? And we
Interesting.
were like, oh, okay. And then the way we funded it was through, you could like put these conference calling servers like in rural Iowa,
Okay.
and there was like a reciprocal comp arbitrage that the local phone company would get, and then someone else had figured out they would share it with you. So we're like, oh, well, why don't we just share it with them? And so that's basically how we funded the business.
So you didn't raise money for this business up front.
Probably we raised like $1 million, 2 million, a couple million. No, we raised a couple $1 million over, because we were going to be this hardware company.
Yeah, right.
And then I think we ended up taking in some venture, because the venture guys love the arbitrage model. And then when we sold it to GoTo, we were their third choice.
Oh,
Like we were their vendor. Like they were running all their minutes through us, but we were getting the money because they didn't want any part of that business.
so
And then they were like, yeah.
well, I was going to ask you how that transaction went down.
It was 2008.
Uh-oh. Huge market
And we
collapse.
must have, well, yeah, but we must have, no, but we negotiated the term sheet like in June. So we had signed the term sheet, and then the world fell apart, and then
Okay.
Lehman happened.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, they loved the IP,
Hmm.
and they eventually warmed up to the revenue model. But basically, they had boxed themselves in because they had added audio to the front end,
Hmm.
but they had no. They thought they could get the back end from a competitor, but we had. The competitor was like, had sort of knocked us, like reverse engineered us, but we had never released the thing that made it scale so it could work for GoToWebinar,
Interesting.
because we stopped selling the product. So we kept that for the internal service. And so the competitor's knockoff, it didn't have the logic to scale them. You could scale it across a server, but then we had it was matrix, so you could scale it across multiple servers, because webinars were hundreds of people. And some of them were listen only, stuff like that, right? But that was a big deal. And so when they bought us, they were like, cool, well, we have like 6 months to get all this stuff done. And they were like, oh, those other guys were so pissed they pulled their servers. We have to do it over Thanksgiving.
Wild.
Yeah. So it's like, like you're like, okay, you're just constantly reacting to what's going on.
How long was your second company from
First one
inception?
was, yeah, first one was 3.5 years. Second one was 7. So far with ScreenMeet, we're at 10. But ScreenMeet may just be ScreenMeet for a while, you know?
Do you have
That's okay.
similar ambitions to like flip it, exit it, or is that not even in your mind right now?
I think all of those things are opportunistic
Hmm.
and you evaluate them, you know, as they one off.
But what you
And
guys
and
got
they're around. They're always around. Like, and like if you're like you could always find a middle market private equity
totally.
buyer. But like why if you're compounding cash flow, why do you want to sell that?
But you guys are also
Unless you
really
unless
timely.
you I don't know, you know? It's just like where hard work meets preparation. Just keep just keep doing it.
Do you think it's harder to start a company now than it was then, or do you think it's easier?
I think it's easier to start a company. I think it's harder to find a unique competitive advantage. I think it's gotten much more sophisticated.
But don't you think the market's grown, given it more opportunities? Like, isn't there more angles you can take than you could before just because of the size of the
Yes.
market?
Yes, it's much bigger. It's much bigger, it's much more diversified. But for somebody like me who's sort of like there aren't that many things for me to do necessarily because like I'm not as smart as these new guys. Right? I'm like at an architectural level, not at a like
Last
it,
question is really around something that's really timely right now. And this is this artificial intelligence race, which is super fast, changing every day. I feel like every day I'm hearing something new, something else is happening, something prototyping is getting faster, coding is getting easier. Are you leveraging any of that? And would you advise other founders to leverage any of
oh, I mean, I'm pretty sure every per engineer uses Cursor a couple hours a day,
that? Does it change the
Yeah,
startup game?
I mean, hopefully it makes the startups more efficient,
Grow
you
faster
know.
with less money kind
Well,
of
I
thing?
think that I think I think that like some of those growths are. I saw a really interesting post on it. It's mainly just because the viral loops are so tight.
Oh, explain that, please.
Well, like Cursor or what there's
Yeah.
like all these like AI companies to 100 million in
Yeah.
12 months or 18 months. Like they by using it, you get other people to use it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
that's sort of
yes.
the virality of it, right? Like, and maybe if they use it, it makes it better because they'll like comment on your code or something. I don't know what the viral loops are, but I mean that's the stuff I've always been like super jealous of.
Is there any way to
You know,
incorporate that in ScreenMeet?
no, I mean
Too late.
yes, but it changes. ScreenMeet sells to the global 2K,
Right.
and so you can't have viral loops. You have different viral loops. They're not in the product. They're in the sort of social engineering of the go to market.
Interesting.
You're referring different things on different levels.
So you don't
But
think
yeah,
that works
gosh,
in the enterprise, let's say, the global 2000, Fortune 500, whatever?
you know what works is time and attention,
Yeah.
right?
Well
And
said.
like per investing personal energy into relationships. Like it's super. I mean, it's people buy software from people at the end of the day.
It's not going to get replaced by AI.
Well, it depends if the AI is buying. If the AI is buying, it's different. I'll send my
Okay.
AI. Yeah, with
Yeah.
the person's AI. But no, these are really, on all the other stuff, I would say these are like scary and turbulent times. And I direct all my political donations to welcomepac.org.
Do you want to
So
tell us about that as the last thing on our pod?
a couple buddies of mine a few years ago said if we run more centrist Democrats in Republican districts, probably a lot of people in the middle who like that. And there's a handful in Congress today. And so the Blue Dogs and the Welcome Pack sort of work together to encourage more, say, bipartisan, sort of centrist candidates. And that, I believe, is our path back to some semblance of democracy.
And it's something you're very passionate about.
Very passionate about. Like, if I had more time, I would be spending more time on. But I don't, because I'm spending all my time on ScreenMeet. So thanks for having me, Arthur. I gotta go.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining.
Yeah. Cheers. Later. Bye.